What happens when the person you trust most becomes your greatest enemy? In the suffocating heat of 1850s Georgia cotton fields, one man's smile hides the darkest of secrets. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories that will leave you speechless. The sun blazed mercilessly over Whitmore Plantation in rural Georgia, 1853. The cotton fields stretched endlessly under the oppressive heat, white bowls glistening like false promises of relief. Among the rows of enslaved workers bent low under their burden, one figure stood apart, not because of his position, but because of his demeanor. Samuel "Sam" Washington moved through the fields with an easy stride, his weathered hands occasionally helping to steady a stumbling worker or offering a quiet word of encouragement. At 35, he had earned the position of driver, a role that placed him between the enslaved community and the white overseers. But unlike other drivers who ruled with iron fists, Sam seemed different. The plantation itself was a sprawling testament to the wealth built on human suffering. Master Whitmore's grand house sat atop a gentle hill, its white columns gleaming in the morning sun. Below it, the slave quarters formed a small village of weathered wooden structures, each housing multiple families in spaces barely fit for animals. Sam had been on this plantation for 15 years, arriving as a young man of 20 from a smaller farm in South Carolina. His intelligence and apparent loyalty had quickly caught the attention of the overseers, who recognized his potential as a bridge between the white management and the enslaved workforce. "Easy there, Moses," Sam said softly, placing a gentle hand on the shoulder of an elderly man struggling with his cotton sack. "Take your time. Ain't no rush that's worth your health." Moses looked up gratefully, sweat streaming down his weathered face. The old man had been on the plantation longer than anyone. Nearly 30 years of back-breaking labor had bent his spine and gnarled his hands, but his spirit remained unbroken. "Thank you, Sam. Don't know what we'd do without you looking out for us." Sam's smile was warm, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "We all in this together, old man. That's how we survive." But even as he spoke these comforting words, Sam was cataloguing Moses' weaknesses with the cold precision of a predator studying its prey. The old man's left leg had been bothering him for weeks, and his breathing was labored. Most importantly, Moses had been teaching some of the younger workers to read using a hidden Bible, a dangerous activity that could result in severe punishment if discovered. Nearby, a young woman named Clara watched the interaction with relief. At 19, she had been on the plantation for only 6 months, sold from a smaller farm after her previous master's death. The brutality she had witnessed in those first weeks had left her terrified and isolated, until Sam had taken her under his wing. "Clara, child," Sam called out, approaching her with that same gentle manner, "how you holding up in this heat?" "I'm managing, Mr. Sam," she replied, using the respectful title the other enslaved people had taught her, "though my hands are getting mighty sore from the cotton bowls." Sam examined her hands with what appeared to be genuine concern. "These cuts look painful. Tell you what, after supper come find me. I got some salve that'll help with the healing." Clara's eyes brightened with gratitude. "You're too kind, Mr. Sam. I don't know how to thank you." "No need for thanks," Sam replied, his voice carrying a warmth that seemed to envelope her like a protective blanket. "We family here. Family looks after family." What Clara didn't know was that Sam was already planning how to use her gratitude to his advantage. Young, isolated, and desperate for protection, she would be an ideal source of information about the other workers. As the day wore on, Sam continued his rounds through the fields. He helped young Thomas, barely 16, learn the most efficient way to pick cotton without damaging the plants. Thomas had arrived just 2 months ago, purchased from an estate sale in Alabama. "See, you want to twist the bowl like this," Sam demonstrated, his movements quick and practiced. "Don't pull straight. That damages the plant and makes it harder for the next growth." Thomas nodded eagerly, grateful for any guidance that might help him avoid the overseer's attention. Sam filed away this information along with everything else he learned about the workers. He shared water from his personal flask with pregnant Susanna when she looked faint. Susanna was in her 7th month, her belly swollen with a child who would be born into the same bondage that defined her own existence. He even intervened when Jacob, a newer arrival, was struggling to keep up with his quota. Jacob was 22, strong and intelligent, but clearly struggling with the psychological adjustment to his new circumstances. He had been born free in Pennsylvania, the son of escaped slaves who had built a small but successful life in Philadelphia. "Jacob, son," Sam called out, noticing the young man's agitation. "You look like you got something heavy on your mind." Jacob looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and despair, just trying to understand how this is my life now. 6 months ago I was working in my father's carpentry shop, planning to marry my sweetheart. Now I'm here, picking cotton for a man who thinks he owns me. "I know it's hard," Sam said, his voice filled with false sympathy. "But dwelling on what was won't help you survive what is. You got to find a way to make peace with your situation, at least on the surface." "Overseer Johnson's been watching Jacob real close," whispered Ruth, an older woman who had been on the plantation for over 20 years. "That boy better be careful, or he'll find himself on the wrong end of that whip." Sam nodded thoughtfully. "Jacob's still learning. Sometimes it takes time to adjust to the way things work here. I'll keep an eye on him." What none of them noticed was the way Sam's eyes lingered on each interaction, cataloguing every weakness, every fear, every whispered confidence. Behind his kind smile, his mind worked like a ledger, recording debts that would soon come due. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, the workers made their way back to the slave quarters. The wooden buildings, weathered and cramped, housed nearly 60 people in conditions that would have been considered inhumane for livestock. Sam walked among them, still playing his role perfectly. He helped carry the heavier cotton sacks, assisted the elderly and infirm, and offered words of encouragement to those who seemed particularly downtrodden. "Tomorrow's another day," he told a group of exhausted workers. "And we'll face it together, just like we always do." But as the enslaved community settled in for the night, Sam made his way to a different destination. The overseer's cabin sat on a small hill overlooking the quarters, its windows glowing with lamplight. Inside, Jeremiah Johnson waited, a man whose reputation for cruelty was matched only by his appetite for information. Sam knocked softly on the door, his demeanor shifting subtly as he prepared for a very different kind of conversation. "Come in, Sam," Johnson's voice called from within. The transformation was immediate and chilling. Gone was the gentle smile, the warm eyes, the protective stance. In their place was something cold and calculating, a predator reporting to his master. "Evening, Mr. Johnson," Sam said, his voice now carrying a different tone entirely. "Got some things you might want to know about." Johnson looked up from his ledger, a cruel smile playing at his lips. "I'm listening." "That new boy, Jacob, he's been talking about running. Heard him asking Moses about the roads north of here. And Clara, the young one from the Henderson place, she's been hiding food in her quarters. Might be planning something or might just be scared. Either way, thought you should know." Johnson's eyes gleamed with interest. "Anything else?" Sam settled into a chair, completely at ease in this role that would have horrified those who trusted him. "Thomas has been complaining about the workload, says it ain't fair that some folks get easier tasks. And Susanna, the pregnant one, she's been moving slower than she should. Might be using her condition to avoid her full share of work." "Excellent work, Sam," Johnson said, making notes in his ledger. "Your observations are always so helpful in maintaining order." Sam's smile returned, but it was nothing like the warm expression he showed in the fields. This smile was cold, satisfied, predatory. "Just doing my part to keep things running smooth, Mr. Johnson. These people trust me, and that trust, well, it's a powerful tool when used properly." As Sam made his way back to his own quarters, slightly larger and better appointed than those of the other enslaved people, he felt a familiar sense of satisfaction. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to gather information, new chances to demonstrate his value to the overseers, new ways to feed the hunger that drove him. He had perfected his performance over the years, becoming exactly what the enslaved community needed him to be: a protector, a confidant, a source of hope in their hopeless world, and that made his betrayals all the more devastating. In the darkness of his room, Sam allowed himself a moment of honest reflection. He felt no guilt for what he did, only a deep, abiding pleasure in the power he wielded. Every secret shared, every weakness revealed, every trust betrayed, fed something dark and insatiable within him. Tomorrow he would return to the fields with his gentle smile and kind words. He would offer comfort and support, gather new intelligence, and continue building the relationships that made his true work possible. After all, the best predators were those who convinced their prey that they were protectors. The morning mist clung to the cotton fields like a shroud as the enslaved workers began another day of backbreaking labor. The air was thick with humidity and the promise of another scorching day. Sam moved through the rows with his characteristic ease, greeting each worker with what appeared to be genuine warmth. The plantation bell had rung at 4:30, as it did every morning, calling the workers to another day of endless toil. By 5 o'clock, the fields were full of bent figures moving through the rows, their movements already mechanical from years of repetition. Sam's morning routine was carefully choreographed to maximize his opportunities for gathering information. He would start at the eastern edge of the fields, where the newer workers were typically assigned, then work his way west toward the more experienced hands. "Morning, Clara," he called out to the young woman who had sought his help the previous evening. "How are those hands feeling today?" Clara looked up with a grateful smile, flexing her fingers. "Much better, Mr. Sam. That salve you gave me worked wonders. The cuts are already starting to heal." "Glad to hear it," Sam replied, his voice carrying that familiar note of concern. "Can't have our best workers suffering needlessly." What Clara didn't know was that the salve Sam had given her was nothing more than common lard, mixed with a bit of mint to mask the smell. The healing was entirely natural, but her gratitude was exactly what Sam had been counting on. This was one of Sam's most effective techniques, offering help that appeared meaningful but cost him nothing, while creating a debt of gratitude that could be exploited later. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," Clara continued, lowering her voice. "About us being family here. It means a lot, having someone who understands." Sam's expression remained carefully sympathetic, but internally he was already calculating how to use this emotional vulnerability. Clara's isolation and gratitude made her an ideal source of information about the other workers. As the morning progressed, Sam noticed Jacob struggling more than usual. The young man's movements were sluggish, and he kept glancing nervously toward the overseer's position at the edge of the field. "Jacob," Sam called softly, approaching with his usual gentle manner. "You look troubled, son. What's weighing on your mind?" Jacob hesitated, looking around to ensure they wouldn't be overheard. "Mr. Sam, I've been thinking about things, about this place, about what kind of life this is." Sam's expression remained carefully neutral, but internally he felt a familiar thrill. This was exactly the kind of information that made him valuable to the overseers. "Go on," he encouraged. "Sometimes it helps to talk about what's troubling you." "I keep thinking about my sister," Jacob continued, his voice barely above a whisper. She got sold to a plantation up in Virginia before I came here. I wonder if there might be a way to find her someday." "That's natural," Sam said, placing a comforting hand on Jacob's shoulder. "Family bonds don't break just because we're separated, but you gotta be careful about such thoughts, son. Dreaming about things that can't be can lead a man to make dangerous choices." Jacob nodded, but Sam could see the desperate hope still burning in his eyes. "I know, Mr. Sam, but sometimes I wonder about the roads leading north. Whether a man could find his way to freedom if he was careful enough." There it was, the confession Sam had been waiting for. But his expression remained one of paternal concern. "Jacob, I understand the feeling, but you got to think practical. This plantation, hard as it is, it's what we know, out there." Sam gestured vaguely toward the horizon. "Out there's nothing but danger for folks like us. Dogs, slave catchers, worse things than you can imagine." "But some folks have made it," Jacob insisted. "I heard stories." "Stories," Sam interrupted gently. "That's all they are, son. For every story of someone making it to freedom, there's 10 more about folks who tried and ended up dead in the woods, or worse, are brought back to face punishment that makes our daily hardships look like Sunday dinner." Jacob's shoulders sagged, but Sam could see the idea hadn't been completely extinguished. Perfect. Let the boy think about it, plan it, maybe even confide in others. The more information Sam could gather, the more valuable he became. Later that morning, Sam encountered Susanna resting in the shade of a cotton wagon. The pregnant woman was breathing heavily, one hand pressed to her swollen belly. "Susanna, you feeling all right?" Sam asked, crouching beside her with apparent concern. "Just tired, Mr. Sam," she replied. "This baby's been kicking something fierce, and the heat ain't helping none." Sam nodded sympathetically. "When's the baby due?" "Deet, another month, maybe 6 weeks," Susanna said. "I'm trying to keep up with my work, but it's getting harder every day." "You shouldn't push yourself too hard," Sam said. "A woman in your condition needs to be careful." Susanna looked at him gratefully. "You're the only one who seems to understand, Mr. Sam. Overseer Johnson, he just sees another worker who ain't pulling her weight." "Don't you worry about Johnson," Sam said, his voice taking on a protective tone. "I'll make sure he understands your situation. You just focus on staying healthy for that baby." But even as he spoke these comforting words, Sam was calculating. Susanna's pregnancy was indeed slowing her down, and Johnson had already made comments about lazy workers using their condition as an excuse. As the day wore on, Sam continued his careful work of building trust while gathering intelligence. He learned that Moses had been teaching some of the younger workers to read using a hidden Bible, a dangerous activity that could result in severe punishment. He discovered that Ruth had been saving small amounts of food, possibly planning to help someone attempt an escape. He noted which workers seemed most dissatisfied, which ones showed signs of planning resistance, and which ones might be useful as additional sources of information. But Sam's most valuable discovery came during the lunch break, when he overheard a whispered conversation between Clara and Thomas. "I can't take much more of this," Thomas was saying, his young voice cracking with emotion. "Yesterday, I saw Johnson whip old Peter until he couldn't stand. For what? For stopping to catch his breath." Clara nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "I know. Sometimes I think about what Mr. Sam said, about us being family. But what kind of family has to watch each other suffer like this?" "Maybe we don't have to just watch," Thomas said, his voice dropping even lower. "Maybe there's things we could do." "What kind of things?" Clara asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. "I heard Jacob talking about the roads north, and Moses, he knows things, about reading, about the world outside this place. Maybe if we all work together." Sam felt his pulse quicken. This was exactly the kind of conspiracy that the overseers feared most, and the kind of information that made him indispensable. He moved closer, pretending to check on a nearby cotton plant while straining to hear more. "You think Mr. Sam would help us?" Clara asked. "He's always been so kind, and he knows more about how things work here than anyone." Thomas considered this. "Maybe, but we'd have to be careful about who we trust. Even Mr. Sam has to answer to the overseers." "If only they knew," Sam thought with dark amusement. "If only they knew that their trusted protector was the very person who would ensure their plans never came to fruition." As the lunch break ended and the workers returned to their tasks, Sam filed away every detail of the conversation. The names, the plans, the timeline, all of it would be included in his next report to Johnson. That evening, as the workers returned to their quarters, Sam made his usual rounds. He checked on the sick, offered words of comfort to the discouraged, and maintained the facade that had served him so well. "Jacob," he called out, approaching the young man with his characteristic warmth. "How you feeling after today? You seemed a bit troubled this morning." Jacob looked around nervously before responding. "Just thinking about things, Mr. Sam. About life, about what the future might hold." "That's natural for a young man," Sam replied. "Sometimes thinking about the future can give us hope, even in difficult circumstances." "You ever think about what life might be like somewhere else?" Jacob asked, his voice barely audible. Sam's expression grew thoughtful. "I think every man dreams of better circumstances. The question is whether those dreams can become reality, or whether they're just ways of making the present more bearable." When he finally made his way to Johnson's cabin, he carried with him a treasure trove of information that would shape the overseer's actions for days to come. "You've outdone yourself tonight, Sam," Johnson said after hearing the report. "A potential escape plot, illegal reading lessons, food hoarding, and workers discussing resistance. This is exactly the kind of intelligence that keeps this plantation running smoothly." Sam allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. "Just doing my job, Mr. Johnson. These people see me as one of them, so they don't guard their words around me. Makes it easy to know what they're really thinking." "And what about this escape plot? How serious do you think they are?" "Still in the talking stage," Sam replied, "but Jacob's definitely the ringleader. He's been asking questions about the roads, and now he's got Thomas and Clara thinking about joining him. Give it another week or two, and they'll probably try to bring in Moses and maybe Ruth." Johnson made detailed notes. "We'll let them plan a bit more, gather more evidence, then we'll make an example that the others won't forget." As Sam walked back to his quarters, he felt the familiar rush of power that came with his secret role. Tomorrow he would return to the fields as the kind, protective driver. He would offer comfort to the very people he was betraying, gather more of their secrets, and continue building the trust that made his betrayals possible. The enslaved workers saw him as their protector, their advocate, their hope for a better tomorrow. They had no idea that their greatest enemy wore the face of their most trusted friend. In the darkness of his room, Sam allowed himself a moment of honest satisfaction. Every secret shared, every plan revealed, every trust betrayed fed the hunger that drove him, and tomorrow would bring new opportunities to perfect his deadly craft. 3 weeks had passed since Sam first learned of the escape plot, and the conspiracy had grown exactly as he had predicted. What started as desperate whispers between Jacob, Thomas, and Clara had expanded to include Moses, Ruth, and 2 other workers, Daniel and Mary. They met in secret after the evening meal, hidden in the shadows behind the old tobacco barn that hadn't been used in years. The tobacco barn was a relic from the plantation's earlier days, when Master Whitmore's father had experimented with different crops before settling on cotton. The structure was slowly deteriorating, its wooden walls weathered and full of gaps that provided perfect hiding spots for clandestine meetings. Sam knew about every meeting, every plan, every detail of their desperate scheme. He had positioned himself perfectly, offering just enough encouragement to keep them planning while gathering every piece of information they shared. The group's planning had become increasingly sophisticated over the weeks. They had studied the patrol patterns of the overseers, identified the best routes through the surrounding countryside, and even established contact with what they believed was an underground network of abolitionists. On this particular evening, the conspirators had gathered for what they believed would be their final planning session. Hidden in the darkness nearby, Sam listened as they finalized their escape attempt, scheduled for the following night when the moon would be dark. "Moses, you sure about this route?" Jacob whispered, studying the crude map the old man had drawn in the dirt. "As sure as I can be," Moses replied. "Follow the creek north for about 5 miles, then head east toward the main road. There's supposed to be folks along that road who help people like us." "And you're certain about the timing?" Clara asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and hope. "Guards change at midnight," Thomas confirmed. "That gives us maybe 4 hours before they notice we're gone. Should be enough time to get far enough away that the dogs can't track us." The group had also prepared supplies for their journey, small amounts of food saved from their meager rations, water containers fashioned from gourds, and rough maps drawn from memory and hearsay. They had even managed to acquire a compass, stolen from the overseer's office by Daniel during a cleaning assignment. Ruth, who had been quiet throughout the planning, finally spoke up. "What about Mr. Sam? Shouldn't we tell him? He's always been good to us, and he could help." The group fell silent, considering this. Sam held his breath, curious to see how they would resolve this dilemma. "I've been thinking about that," Jacob said slowly. "Mr. Sam's a good man, but he's still got to answer to the overseers. If something goes wrong, if we get caught, they'll ask him what he knew. Better to keep him out of it, for his own protection." Sam almost smiled at the irony. They were protecting him from the very betrayal he was about to commit. "Jacob's right," Moses agreed. "The fewer people who know, the safer it is for everyone." As the meeting broke up and the conspirators slipped back to their quarters, Sam remained hidden in the shadows, his mind racing with anticipation. Tomorrow night, he would deliver the most valuable intelligence of his career. The next day dawned grey and humid, with heavy clouds promising an afternoon thunderstorm. Sam moved through the fields with his usual demeanor, but those who knew him well might have noticed a subtle change, an extra brightness in his eyes, a barely contained energy in his movements. "You seem in good spirits today, Mr. Sam," Clara observed during the morning break. "Just grateful for another day," Sam replied with his characteristic warmth. "Sometimes a man's got to appreciate what he has, even when times are hard." Clara nodded, though she seemed distracted. Sam could see the nervous energy in her movements, the way her eyes kept darting toward the tree line where freedom beckoned. By tonight, that nervous energy would be replaced by terror and despair. As the day progressed, Sam made a point of checking on each of the conspirators. He offered Jacob encouragement when the young man seemed particularly anxious. He helped Thomas with his cotton quota when the boy's hands shook too badly to work efficiently. He even shared his water with Ruth when she complained of feeling faint. "You all right, Ruth?" he asked with apparent concern. "You seem a bit peaked today." "Just tired, Mr. Sam," Ruth replied, though her eyes held a distant look. "Sometimes I think about what life might be like somewhere else, you know? Somewhere a person could make their own choices." "I understand the feeling," Sam said gently. "But sometimes the life we know, hard as it is better than the unknown dangers out there." Ruth nodded absently, but Sam could see she wasn't really listening. Her mind was already on the road north, on the freedom that seemed so tantalizingly close. As evening approached and the workers began their trek back to the quarters, Sam felt the familiar thrill of anticipation. In just a few hours, he would make his way to Johnson's cabin with the most detailed intelligence report of his career. During the evening meal, Sam made a point of sitting with the conspirators, offering casual conversation that helped mask their nervous energy. To any observer, it would have looked like nothing more than the usual gathering of workers sharing their meager supper. "Storm's coming," Sam observed, glancing at the darkening sky. "Might be a rough night." "Storms don't last forever," Jacob replied. And Sam caught the double meaning in his words. "No," Sam agreed with a knowing smile, "they don't, but sometimes they're worse than folks expect." As the meal ended and the workers began settling in for the night, Sam made his usual rounds. He checked on the sick, offered words of comfort to the discouraged, and maintained the facade that had served him so well. At 11 o'clock, when the quarters had grown quiet, Sam slipped out of his cabin and made his way toward the overseer's house. But instead of going directly there, he took a detour that brought him near the old tobacco barn, where the conspirators would soon gather for their escape attempt. He wanted to see them one last time before he destroyed their dreams. Hidden in the shadows, Sam watched as the 7 figures crept through the darkness toward their meeting point. Even in the dim light, he could see the tension in their movements, the way they started at every sound. They were terrified, but their desperation drove them forward. "Everyone here?" Jacob whispered as they gathered behind the barn. "All present," Moses confirmed. "You sure about this, boy? Once we start, there ain't no turning back." "I'm sure," Jacob replied, though his voice trembled slightly. "We all are, right?" One by one, the others confirmed their commitment. Clara's voice was barely audible, but her determination was clear. Thomas sounded younger than his 16 years, but his resolve was firm. Ruth, Daniel, and Mary each added their quiet agreement. "Then let's go," Jacob said. "Stay close, stay quiet, and remember, we're family. We look out for each other." As the group began moving toward the creek that would guide them north, Sam felt a surge of dark satisfaction. They thought they were family, thought they could trust each other, thought their careful planning would lead them to freedom. They had no idea that their most trusted protector had already sealed their fate. Sam made his way quickly to Johnson's cabin, where the overseer was waiting with a group of armed men and a pack of tracking dogs. "They're moving now," Sam reported. 7 of them, just like I said. They'll follow the creek north for about 5 miles, then turn east toward the main road. Johnson's smile was cruel and satisfied. "Perfect. We'll give them a head start, let them think they're making progress, then we'll run them down like the animals they are." "What about punishment?" Sam asked, though he already knew the answer. "Public whipping for all of them," Johnson replied. "And Jacob, he'll get special treatment. Can't have the others thinking they can organize escape attempts without consequences." Sam nodded, feeling the familiar rush of power that came with his betrayals. "They trusted me completely. Never suspected a thing." "That's what makes you so valuable, Sam," Johnson said. "They see you as one of them, never realizing you're working for us. It's the perfect arrangement." As the hunting party prepared to depart, Sam allowed himself a moment of pure satisfaction. In a few hours, 7 desperate people would learn the true cost of trusting the wrong person. Their screams would echo across the plantation, serving as a warning to anyone else who might consider challenging the established order. And through it all, Sam would maintain his mask of kindness and concern. He would comfort the other workers, express shock and sadness at the betrayal, and continue building the trust that made his next betrayal possible. The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke as the hunting party rode out into the darkness, their dogs straining at their leashes, eager for the hunt. Lightning illuminated the landscape in stark, violent flashes, and thunder rolled across the plantation like the sound of approaching doom. It was, Sam thought with dark satisfaction, the perfect night for a hunt. The screams began at dawn. Sam stood at the window of his cabin, watching as the hunting party returned with their captives. The 7 would-be escapees were bound with ropes, their clothes torn and muddy from their desperate flight through the swamps. The dogs had found them exactly where Sam had predicted they would be, exhausted, lost, and completely unprepared for the reality of escape. The sight was everything Sam had hoped for, and more. The escapees looked like broken dolls, their dreams of freedom shattered as completely as their bodies were battered. The storm had caught them in open country, leaving them soaked and shivering. The dogs had cornered them in a small grove of trees where they had huddled together like frightened children, their grand plan reduced to nothing more than a desperate attempt to survive until morning. Jacob's face was bloodied from his capture, but his eyes still burned with defiance. Even in defeat, the young man refused to be completely broken, a fact that Sam knew would make his eventual destruction even more satisfying. Clara wept silently, her dreams of freedom shattered like glass, her body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. Moses walked with the dignity of a man who had expected this outcome but had chosen hope anyway. His age and experience had taught him that escape attempts rarely succeeded, but he had joined the conspiracy because he believed that some things were worth any risk. Now, as he faced the consequences of that belief, he maintained the quiet strength that had made him a natural leader among the enslaved workers. The others, Thomas, Ruth, Daniel, and Mary, moved like sleepwalkers, their spirits already broken by the knowledge of what was to come. Thomas looked even younger than his 16 years, his face streaked with tears and mud. Ruth moved with the careful steps of someone whose body had been pushed beyond its limits. Daniel and Mary clung to each other, their late addition to the conspiracy now seeming like the worst decision of their lives. As the procession made its way toward the punishment ground, a cleared area near the slave quarters where all disciplinary actions were carried out, Sam prepared for his next performance. He would need to express shock, horror, and sympathy. He would need to comfort the other workers while secretly savoring every moment of the suffering he had orchestrated. The punishment ground was a deliberate creation, designed to maximize the psychological impact of public discipline. It was positioned where every enslaved person could see it from their quarters, a constant reminder of the consequences of resistance. The whipping post stood in the center like a monument to suffering, its wood stained dark with the blood of previous victims. The plantation bell rang out across the fields, its harsh clang summoning every enslaved person to witness what happened to those who dared to dream of freedom. This was how the system maintained itself, through terror, through public displays of consequence, through the complete destruction of hope. The sound of the bell was like a death knell, calling the enslaved community to witness the destruction of 7 of their own. Workers emerged from their quarters with expressions of dread, knowing that they were about to see something that would haunt their dreams for years to come. Children were forced to watch alongside adults, part of the deliberate strategy to instill fear from the earliest age. Sam emerged from his cabin with carefully crafted expressions of concern and confusion. His performance began the moment he stepped outside, every gesture and expression calculated to maintain his cover while positioning himself to observe the maximum amount of suffering. "What's all this commotion?" he asked one of the other workers, though he knew exactly what was happening. "They caught some folks trying to run," came the whispered reply. "Jacob and his group, they're going to make an example of them." Sam's face contorted into what appeared to be genuine shock and dismay. Jacob? But he's just a boy. What could have driven him to such desperation? The performance was flawless, his expression of surprise and concern so convincing that even he almost believed it. This was the culmination of months of careful preparation, the moment when his acting skills would be put to their ultimate test. As the enslaved community gathered around the punishment ground, Sam positioned himself where he could see everything while maintaining his facade of reluctant witness. The crowd was silent, their faces reflecting a mixture of fear, sympathy, and resignation. They had all witnessed public punishments before, but the capture of 7 escapees at once was unprecedented. Overseer Johnson stood before the assembled crowd, his face hard with satisfaction. He was dressed in his finest clothes, as if the punishment were a formal ceremony rather than an act of brutality. His horse stamped impatiently behind him, and the hunting dogs lay panting at his feet, still excited from their successful chase. "Let this be a lesson to all of you," Johnson announced, his voice carrying clearly across the silent gathering. "This is what happens to those who forget their place, who think they can steal themselves away from their rightful owners." The words were carefully chosen to reinforce the legal and moral framework that justified slavery. The escapees were not seeking freedom, they were stealing property. They were not asserting their humanity, they were forgetting their place in the natural order. The whipping post stood like a monument to suffering in the center of the cleared ground. It was an old oak tree that had been cut down and stripped of its bark, leaving a smooth surface that was easier to clean after each use. Iron rings had been driven into the wood at various heights, allowing victims to be secured in different positions, depending on the nature of their punishment. One by one, the captured escapees were brought forward. The punishment was methodical, brutal, and designed to break not just the bodies of the guilty, but the spirits of all who watched. Johnson had orchestrated the entire spectacle with the precision of a theatrical director, understanding that the psychological impact was just as important as the physical suffering. Sam observed it all with the detached interest of a connoisseur appreciating a fine performance. Each crack of the whip, each cry of pain, each plea for mercy fed the dark hunger that drove him. This was his true reward, not the small privileges that came with his position as driver, but the exquisite pleasure of watching those who had trusted him suffer the consequences of that trust. The first to be punished was Daniel, chosen because his late addition to the conspiracy made him seem less sympathetic to the watching crowd. His punishment was severe, but not extreme. 20 lashes that left his back bloody, but not permanently damaged. His screams echoed across the plantation, serving as an overture to the symphony of suffering that would follow. Daniel's cries were raw and desperate, the sounds of a man who had never experienced such pain before. He had been a house servant before joining the field workers, and his body was not accustomed to the brutal realities of plantation discipline. Each lash tore through his flesh like a knife, leaving deep welts that would scar him for life. Clara was the first to break completely. After the 5th lash, she collapsed against the post, sobbing uncontrollably. "Please," she begged, "I'm sorry. I'll never try again. Please stop." Her breakdown was exactly what Johnson had been hoping for. The sight of a young woman being brutally whipped was designed to horrify the watching crowd and demonstrate that no one, regardless of age, gender, or previous good behavior, was immune from punishment. But Johnson was just getting started. "Sorry isn't enough," he snarled. "You need to understand the full weight of your betrayal." Clara's punishment continued for another 15 lashes, each one accompanied by her increasingly desperate pleas for mercy. By the end, she was unconscious, her body hanging limply from the restraints. The sight of her broken form sent a wave of horror through the watching crowd. Mary's punishment was accompanied by the additional cruelty of psychological torture. Johnson made sure to remind her repeatedly of her dead infant son, suggesting that her attempt to escape was a betrayal of his memory. The combination of physical pain and emotional torment left her completely broken, her spirit as shattered as her body. "Your boy died because you couldn't protect him," Johnson taunted as the whip fell. and now you abandon his memory for a foolish dream. What kind of mother are you? Mary's screams were unlike anything the crowd had heard before, not just cries of physical pain, but the sound of a soul being torn apart. She had joined the escape attempt because she couldn't bear to live in the place where her child had died, but now that grief was being weaponized against her, Thomas was next, his youth making his punishment even more horrifying to witness. The boy had never been whipped before, and his terror was palpable as he was dragged to the post. His punishment was designed to be educational. Each lash was accompanied by a lecture about the consequences of rebellion and the futility of resistance. "This is what happens to young fools who listen to the wrong people," Johnson announced as the whip fell. "This is the price of dreaming about things that can never be." Thomas's screams were high-pitched and desperate, the cries of a child rather than a man. His punishment lasted 30 lashes, leaving him barely conscious and permanently scarred both physically and psychologically. The boy who had once been eager to learn and quick to smile would never be the same. Ruth's punishment was perhaps the most heartbreaking to witness. The elderly woman had lived through decades of slavery, had seen her children sold away, had endured countless hardships with quiet dignity. Her decision to join the escape attempt had been born of desperation rather than hope. A final gamble by someone who had nothing left to lose. Her punishment was conducted with deliberate cruelty, designed to break not just her body, but her spirit. Johnson knew that Ruth was respected among the enslaved community, and her complete destruction would send a powerful message about the futility of resistance. "Look at this old fool," Johnson sneered as he raised the whip. 60 years old and still dreaming of running away. Some people never learn. Ruth endured her punishment with the same quiet dignity she had shown throughout her life, refusing to give Johnson the satisfaction of hearing her beg. But Sam could see the light fading from her eyes with each lash, the final extinguishing of a spirit that had endured more than any human should have to bear. When it was Jacob's turn, the young man was barely conscious from watching the others suffer. But Johnson had saved the worst for last. "This one," he announced, "was the ringleader. He convinced the others to throw their lives away on an impossible dream. He deserves special consideration." The beating that followed was savage beyond description. Jacob's back was open to the bone, his blood mixing with the red clay of the punishment ground. But even as his body was destroyed, his spirit remained unbroken. The young man's refusal to be completely defeated was both inspiring and tragic. "I regret nothing," he gasped between lashes. "Freedom is worth any price." Jacob's defiance only enraged Johnson further. "We'll see about that," he snarled. Raising the whip again, the punishment continued until Jacob finally lost consciousness, his body hanging limply from the post like a broken doll. Even then, Johnson ordered several more lashes, ensuring that the young man would carry the scars of his rebellion for the rest of his life. But it was Moses who finally broke Sam's careful composure. As the old man was dragged to the post, he looked directly at Sam with eyes that seemed to see straight through his mask. The moment was electric, charged with an understanding that transcended words. "Somebody told them," Moses said quietly, his voice carrying despite his weakness. "Somebody they trusted, somebody who knew every detail of our plan." The words hit the watching crowd like a physical blow.